Miss Brooks, we'd appreciate your help understanding what happened here.
I think there's more to this story than anyone realizes. Something important is about to come out.
The woman does not belong in that house, the officer said, and within seconds an entire neighborhood began believing a lie. The flashing red and blue lights painted moving shadows across the quiet suburban street as residents stepped onto porches and lawns, drawn from their homes by the commotion. It was just after midnight in a peaceful neighborhood outside Richmond, Virginia, the kind of place where most people knew each other's names and where unusual activity became the center of attention almost instantly. Vanessa Carter stood barefoot on her front walkway, wearing gray sweatpants and a loose sweatshirt, staring at the scene unfolding around her with a mixture of disbelief and confusion. The cool night air brushed against her face as several police vehicles lined the curb in front of the two-story brick home she had owned for nearly 8 years. Bright headlights illuminated her front lawn. The carefully maintained flower bed she had planted every spring cast long shadows across the grass. Neighbors watched from a distance, whispering among themselves as officers moved across the property with determined expressions. Vanessa looked from one officer to another, searching for an explanation that never seemed to come. "There has to be some mistake," she said calmly. Her voice never rose. Her hands remained visible. She made no sudden movements. Yet nobody appeared interested in hearing her side of the story. Officer Daniel Brooks stood near the front gate reviewing information on a digital tablet. At 38 years old, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who trusted procedure and believed he was doing exactly what needed to be done. Earlier that evening, information had reached the department regarding a property flagged through a federal database review. Certain details connected to the address had triggered concern. The report suggested possible unauthorized occupancy. The information seemed serious enough to demand immediate attention. Daniel had responded without hesitation. Now, standing beneath the glow of police lights, he looked toward Vanessa and saw only a woman refusing to accept reality. What he did not know was that the reality he believed in was already beginning to crack. Vanessa glanced back toward her house. Warm light still glowed through the living room windows. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the coffee table inside. A novel rested open beside it. Less than 15 minutes earlier, she had been curled beneath a blanket reading quietly before bed. Now strangers stood across her property while cameras appeared from every direction. A teenager across the street had already started recording on his phone. Another neighbor began live streaming. The story was spreading before anyone knew the truth. "We need you to remain outside while we verify ownership," an officer said. Vanessa frowned. "Verify ownership? I am the owner." Several neighbors exchanged uncertain looks. One elderly woman who lived nearby stepped closer to her mailbox and squinted toward the house. She had seen Vanessa mowing the lawn every weekend. She had accepted Christmas cookies from her every December. None of this made sense. Yet the confidence displayed by the officers made people hesitate. Maybe there was something they did not know. Maybe there was a reason for all of this. Daniel looked down at the report once more. Then his radio crackled briefly before going silent. For a moment, something flashed across his face. Doubt. It disappeared almost instantly. But it was there. And as Vanessa stood beneath the cold glow of emergency lights staring at the home she loved, neither she nor anyone else on that street realized that within the next few minutes, a truth far more frightening than anyone could imagine was about to emerge. Vanessa Carter had lived on Maple Ridge Lane long enough to know the rhythm of the neighborhood better than most people. She knew which porch lights stayed on late, which families left for work before sunrise, and which children raced bicycles down the sidewalk every Saturday afternoon. For years she had blended into the background of the community by choice. Most people knew her as the polite woman who waved when passing by, brought homemade desserts to neighborhood gatherings, and quietly helped elderly residents carry groceries during winter storms. Very few people knew anything beyond that. Standing beneath the flashing lights, Vanessa could feel dozens of curious eyes studying her from across the street. The attention felt strange. She had spent most of her adult life avoiding attention whenever possible. Her job required discretion. Her schedule required flexibility. Some weeks she left town unexpectedly. Other times she disappeared for days before returning home as though nothing unusual had happened. Neighbors occasionally asked questions, but she always smiled and changed the subject. Over time people stopped asking. They simply accepted that Vanessa Carter lived a private life. Across the lawn, a middle-aged neighbor named Linda Harper folded her arms and stared at the scene with growing discomfort. She had known Vanessa for almost 6 years. When Linda's husband underwent surgery, Vanessa had mowed their lawn without being asked. When a storm damaged several houses in the neighborhood, Vanessa spent an entire weekend helping families clean debris from their yards. None of those memories matched what was happening tonight. One by one, other residents began remembering similar acts of kindness. The man who received help jump-starting his truck during a snowstorm. The elderly widow whose mailbox Vanessa repaired. The high school student Vanessa quietly mentored after school. The woman standing alone beneath the police lights was not a stranger to them. She was part of their community. Yet the presence of law enforcement created uncertainty. People wondered if there was something they did not know. Officer Daniel Brooks continued reviewing information from the federal database alert. The longer he looked at the report, the more questions appeared. Certain entries seemed incomplete. Several identification fields contained restrictions that prevented local access. Normally that would not concern him, but something about the situation felt increasingly unusual. He requested additional verification through dispatch and waited for a response. Nearby, Vanessa stood silently beside the walkway leading to her front door. The porch light cast a warm circle across the brick steps. Through the front window she could still see the framed photograph of her parents sitting on a bookshelf inside. A faint reflection shimmered across the glass. For a moment she seemed lost in thought. Then her phone vibrated inside her pocket. She checked the screen briefly. The message contained only 4 words. "Do not leave location." Vanessa read it once, then locked the screen without reacting. No expression crossed her face. No explanation followed. But something changed in her eyes. A calmness settled over her that had not been there before. Far down the quiet street, beyond the gathering crowd and beyond the glow of emergency lights, a dark vehicle turned onto Maple Ridge Lane and began moving slowly toward the neighborhood. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just silent headlights cutting through the darkness as the night continued unfolding toward a truth that nobody present was prepared to discover. Officer Daniel Brooks had built his reputation on one simple belief. Trust the facts. Trust the system. Trust the information in front of you. For more than a decade, that mindset had guided every decision he made in uniform. It was the reason supervisors respected him. It was the reason younger officers sought his advice. Daniel believed that hesitation created mistakes and that confidence prevented them. Yet as he stood beneath the glow of patrol vehicle lights on Maple Ridge Lane, confidence was becoming harder to maintain. The dispatch center still had not returned the additional verification he requested. Normally, database reviews took only a few minutes. Tonight, the delay continued growing longer. Daniel looked down at the digital report again. Several sections remained partially restricted. Multiple fields displayed authorization notices beyond local clearance levels. He frowned. That was unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. Nearby, officers quietly maintained the perimeter while curious neighbors continued gathering along sidewalks and driveways. Phone screens glowed throughout the crowd. Some residents whispered. Others simply watched. The entire neighborhood seemed suspended between confusion and expectation. Daniel glanced toward Vanessa Carter. She remained standing beside her front walkway. Exactly where she had been asked to stay. Most people in her situation would have argued endlessly by now. Some would have demanded answers. Others would have displayed frustration or anger. Vanessa did none of those things. Her calmness bothered him more than resistance would have. She looked less like someone caught in a problem and more like someone waiting for one to resolve itself. The thought irritated him. He pushed it aside. Across the street, Linda Harper quietly approached another neighbor. "Something feels wrong about this," she whispered. The man nodded slowly. "I was thinking the same thing." One by one, similar conversations spread through the crowd. People remembered years of ordinary interactions with Vanessa. Holiday decorations. Neighborhood cookouts. Charity drives. Friendly conversations over backyard fences. Nothing about her life suggested criminal activity. Yet nobody wanted to challenge law enforcement directly. They assumed the officers knew something they did not. Daniel's radio suddenly crackled. He lifted it immediately. The voice from dispatch sounded uncertain. "Officer Brooks, we are still waiting on federal confirmation. We have encountered additional access restrictions." Daniel stared at the radio. "Access restrictions?" "Yes, sir. Several layers of restricted authorization." The transmission ended. Daniel felt a knot forming in his stomach. Access restrictions were not unheard of. But multiple layers attached to a residential address in a quiet Virginia suburb made little sense. He turned toward the house again. Warm light still glowed through the windows. Everything about the property looked normal. Comfortable. Lived in. Yet the database insisted something significant was connected to it. A cool wind moved through the neighborhood, rustling leaves along the sidewalks. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked before falling silent again. The atmosphere felt strangely still. Then headlights appeared at the far end of the street. The dark vehicle Vanessa had unknowingly watched approach earlier continued moving slowly toward the scene. It was not a police vehicle. Not an emergency vehicle. Just a black sport utility vehicle with heavily tinted windows and government-style license plates. Several neighbors noticed it at the same time. Conversations faded. Even the officers glanced toward the approaching vehicle. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Something deep inside him suddenly whispered a possibility he did not want to consider. Vanessa looked toward the vehicle as well. Unlike everyone else, she showed no surprise whatsoever. Her expression remained calm. Almost relieved. And for the first time that night, Officer Daniel Brooks realized that whatever truth was about to arrive on Maple Ridge Lane, it was something Vanessa had expected all along. The black sport utility vehicle rolled to a stop near the curb, and an uneasy silence settled across Maple Ridge Lane. Conversations faded. Phone cameras remained raised, but even the people recording seemed unsure what they were looking at now. The vehicle's engine shut off, leaving only the distant hum of streetlights and the occasional crackle from a police radio. Officer Daniel Brooks watched carefully as the driver's door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out first. Then another. Neither wore a police uniform. Neither appeared concerned by the crowd or the patrol vehicles surrounding the property. They moved with quiet purpose, exchanging a few words before looking directly toward Vanessa Carter. What happened next caught the attention of everyone present. The two men did not approach the officers first. They walked straight toward Vanessa. She remained standing near her front walkway beneath the warm glow of the porch light. Her expression never changed. It was almost as if she had been expecting them from the moment she received the message on her phone. One of the men stopped several feet away and nodded respectfully. Vanessa returned the gesture. The exchange lasted only seconds, yet it immediately altered the atmosphere. Daniel felt it. The officers around him felt it. The neighbors felt it. Something important was happening, and nobody except Vanessa seemed to understand what it meant. Daniel stepped forward. "Sir, this is an active investigation," he said. The man turned calmly toward him. "We understand." His voice remained polite. Professional. Controlled. "We are here regarding the address." Daniel exchanged a glance with another officer. "Can you identify yourselves?" The man reached into his jacket and produced official credentials. Daniel examined them carefully beneath the patrol vehicle lights. His stomach tightened. The identification belonged to a federal agency. Not one that usually appeared in suburban neighborhoods in the middle of the night. Not one that became involved in routine property investigations. Around them, whispers spread through the crowd. Nobody could hear the details, but everyone recognized the sudden shift in authority. Across the street, Linda Harper folded her arms and stared at Vanessa. The woman she thought she knew seemed increasingly mysterious by the minute. The federal representative spoke quietly into a secure phone before looking back toward the house. His eyes moved from the property to Vanessa and then briefly toward Daniel. "We are still verifying information," he said carefully. "Until then, nobody enters the residence." Daniel frowned. That instruction surprised him. If Vanessa truly belonged there, why keep everyone outside? The question lingered in his mind. Vanessa seemed to notice his confusion. For the first time all evening, she spoke directly to him. "Officer Brooks," she said calmly. "You believe you are protecting people tonight." "I understand that." Daniel met her gaze. "Then help me understand what is happening." Vanessa looked toward the dark windows of her home. The warm light still glowed inside. The same familiar house. The same quiet neighborhood. Yet somehow everything felt different now. "I wish I could," she said softly. "But if I explain too soon, it will only make things worse." A cold breeze swept through the street. Leaves rustled across the pavement. Somewhere behind the crowd, another vehicle turned onto Maple Ridge Lane. This one moved even more slowly than the first. And as its headlights approached through the darkness, several people suddenly realized that whatever secrets surrounded Vanessa Carter had not fully arrived yet. The second vehicle was larger than the first and carried no visible markings. "It's dark." Exterior reflected the flashing patrol lights as it slowly approached the growing crowd before coming to a stop several houses away from Vanessa Carter's property. Nobody stepped out immediately. That silence somehow felt heavier than the noise that had filled the neighborhood earlier. Residents shifted uneasily along the sidewalks. Several lowered their phones. Others continued recording, sensing that the night was moving toward something far beyond a routine police response. Officer Daniel Brooks found himself watching the vehicle instead of the house. Every instinct told him that the situation was changing. The question was how much. Near the front walkway, Vanessa remained remarkably composed. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. Her breathing never quickened. The same calm confidence that had unsettled Daniel earlier now seemed even more significant. Most people would have been exhausted by this point. Most would have demanded answers. Vanessa simply waited. One of the federal representatives received another phone call. He listened carefully, spoke only a few words, then ended the conversation. For the first time since arriving, he appeared concerned. Not alarmed. Concerned. He walked toward Vanessa. "We need a few more minutes," he said quietly. She nodded once. "I expected that." Daniel heard the exchange and felt another wave of frustration. Everyone seemed to understand pieces of a puzzle that remained hidden from him. Across the street, Linda Harper stepped forward. "Officer," she called gently. "This woman has lived here for years. Surely someone can explain what is happening." Daniel wished he could. Instead, he offered the only answer available. "We are still verifying information." The response sounded weaker than he intended. Even he could hear it. Suddenly a notification tone echoed from several phones throughout the crowd. Then another. And another. People began checking their screens. Expressions changed almost immediately. Confusion replaced curiosity. Curiosity became concern. A local reporter who had arrived earlier stared at his phone before quickly making a call. Daniel noticed the reaction spreading but could not determine the cause. Then dispatch contacted him again. This time the voice on the radio sounded noticeably different. "Officer Brooks, you are instructed to maintain the current perimeter and await further guidance." Repeat, await further guidance. Daniel pressed the transmit button. "Can dispatch provide clarification?" Several seconds passed. Negative. Information remains restricted. Restricted. The word appeared again. The same word attached to the property. The same word attached to Vanessa. The same word attached to whatever was unfolding on Maple Ridge Lane. A cold knot formed in Daniel's stomach. Nearby, the door of the second vehicle finally opened. An older woman dressed in professional attire stepped out carrying a secure briefcase. She moved with quiet authority and headed directly toward the federal representatives. They immediately stopped talking and focused their attention on her arrival. Even from a distance, the shift in body language was obvious. Respect. Urgency. Importance. Vanessa watched the scene carefully. For the first time all evening, a trace of emotion crossed her face. Not fear. Not anger. Relief. The sight unsettled Daniel more than anything else that night. Because relief suggested that whatever truth was approaching had the power to change everything. The flashing patrol lights continued painting the quiet neighborhood in red and blue while the residents of Maple Ridge Lane stood frozen between two realities. One was the story they thought they understood. The other was still hidden in the darkness, only moments away from revealing itself. For several long minutes, nobody moved. The neighborhood seemed trapped inside a strange pause between uncertainty and revelation. Flashing patrol lights continued washing over houses, parked cars, and silent faces gathered along the sidewalks. The federal representative stood near the curb speaking quietly with the older woman who had arrived carrying the secure briefcase. Whatever conversation was taking place appeared important enough that nobody interrupted. Officer Daniel Brooks remained near the front gate, watching carefully. He had spent his career believing that answers eventually appeared if you followed procedure. Tonight, every answer seemed to create more questions. Across the lawn, Vanessa Carter stood beneath the porch light looking toward her home. The warm glow illuminated her face while cool night air drifted through the trees overhead. She looked tired now. Not frightened. Not angry. Simply tired. The weight of waiting had finally begun to show. Yet even then, she carried herself with remarkable composure. Linda Harper noticed it too. From across the street, she watched Vanessa standing alone despite being surrounded by dozens of people. The image stayed with her. A woman in her own neighborhood. A woman many residents considered a friend. Yet somehow she had become the center of suspicion without anyone truly understanding why. The thought left Linda uncomfortable. Nearby, another notification sounded from a phone. Then several more. Social media discussions about the incident were spreading rapidly beyond the neighborhood. People from nearby communities were beginning to share video clips. Speculation multiplied with every passing minute. Some viewers defended Vanessa. Others questioned her. Most simply wanted answers. Daniel received another call from dispatch. He stepped aside to listen. This conversation lasted longer than the previous ones. His expression gradually changed from frustration to concentration. Then to confusion. Finally, silence. When the call ended, he lowered the radio slowly. One of the younger officers approached him. Anything new? Daniel hesitated before answering. Not enough. It was the truth. He had been informed that federal officials were taking primary control of the situation. He had also been instructed to avoid discussing certain details publicly. Beyond that, almost nothing had been explained. The lack of information troubled him. Suddenly, the older woman carrying the briefcase began walking toward Vanessa. The federal representatives followed several steps behind. The crowd immediately noticed the movement. Conversation stopped. Phone cameras rose again. Vanessa took a slow breath. For the first time all evening, anticipation appeared in her eyes. The woman stopped directly in front of her. No words were exchanged at first. Instead, she carefully opened the briefcase and removed a sealed folder. Even from a distance, Daniel could see multiple security markings across its cover. The sight immediately caught his attention. Documents like that did not appear during ordinary investigations. The woman handed the folder to Vanessa. Vanessa examined it briefly before closing her eyes for a moment. Relief spread across her face. Genuine relief. Not because a problem had disappeared. Because a burden she had been carrying was finally ending. The woman leaned closer and quietly spoke several words that nobody else could hear. Vanessa nodded. Then she looked toward the officers. Toward the neighbors. Toward the cameras. Toward the entire neighborhood that had spent the last hour wondering who she really was. A soft breeze moved through Maple Ridge Lane as midnight slowly drifted toward morning. And standing beneath the porch light of the house everyone thought they understood, Vanessa realized the moment she had hoped to avoid could no longer be postponed. The truth was finally about to come into the open. Vanessa Carter opened the sealed folder and looked down at the documents for only a few seconds before closing it again. She already knew what was inside. The papers were not meant for her. They were meant for everyone else. The older woman turned toward Officer Daniel Brooks and extended an identification card along with several authorization documents. Daniel accepted them carefully. At first he simply scanned the pages. Then he read them again. His expression changed almost immediately. The confidence that had carried him through the evening disappeared beneath visible disbelief. Around him, several officers exchanged uncertain glances. The federal representatives remained silent. They did not need to explain anything. The documents were explaining enough on their own. Daniel looked up toward Vanessa. Then back down at the paperwork. Then back at Vanessa again. For the first time that night, he realized he had never actually known who she was. The older woman spoke calmly so both the officers and nearby residents could hear. Ms. Carter is a federally cleared security specialist assigned to a long-term national infrastructure protection program. The crowd fell silent. Even the people recording seemed unsure how to react. The woman continued. The residence has been associated with multiple restricted systems due to the nature of her assignments. An administrative synchronization error incorrectly flagged the property during a database review earlier today. Daniel stared at the papers in his hands. Every restricted field. Every blocked record. Every unexplained warning. Suddenly they made sense. The property had never been under suspicion. The property had been protected. The same information that convinced local authorities something was wrong had actually been evidence that everything was operating exactly as intended. Across the street, Linda Harper slowly lowered her phone. She remembered every conversation she had ever had with Vanessa. Every smile. Every act of kindness. All those years, the woman had quietly carried responsibilities nobody around her could have imagined. Yet she never mentioned them. She never sought recognition. She simply lived among them as a neighbor. The realization left Linda speechless. Daniel finally found his voice. You knew this would eventually be verified. Vanessa nodded gently. I knew the truth would catch up to the paperwork. There was no anger in her response. No satisfaction. No attempt to embarrass anyone. Somehow that made the moment even harder for Daniel. He looked around at the flashing patrol lights, the gathered crowd, and the woman who had spent more than an hour standing outside her own home while strangers questioned her presence there. The weight of that reality settled heavily on him. Meanwhile, social media notifications continued spreading through the neighborhood. Local reporters were already updating their stories. The narrative that had begun with suspicion was collapsing in real time. The older woman collected the documents and placed them back inside the briefcase. The matter has been resolved, she said. Ms. Carter is free to return to her residence immediately. Nobody moved for several seconds. The night itself seemed frozen. Then Vanessa looked toward the front door of her home. The porch light still glowed warmly against the darkness. Everything appeared exactly as it had before the police arrived. Yet nothing felt the same. Because standing in the quiet aftermath of a mistake that had nearly defined her in the eyes of an entire community, the truth had finally emerged. And it was far more powerful than anyone on Maple Ridge Lane had expected. The silence that followed felt heavier than all the flashing lights, radio transmissions, and whispered conversations that had filled the neighborhood throughout the night. One by one, officers began stepping back from the property. The sense of urgency that had driven the operation slowly dissolved, replaced by something far more uncomfortable. Reflection. Officer Daniel Brooks stood near the front walkway holding his cap in one hand as he watched Vanessa Carter. For several moments, he said nothing. The crowd remained unusually quiet as well. The same neighbors who had gathered out of curiosity were now confronting a different emotion entirely. They were realizing how quickly assumptions could become accepted as truth. Vanessa looked around Maple Ridge Lane and recognized nearly every face staring back at her. These were people she had shared years of ordinary life with. People she greeted during morning walks. People whose children she had watched grow up. Yet tonight had revealed how fragile certainty could be. Daniel finally stepped forward. His voice was calm and measured. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology." The words carried across the quiet street. Nobody interrupted. Nobody looked away. "The information we received led us here," he continued. "But I should have been more careful before drawing conclusions." Vanessa listened without changing her expression. She could see that the apology was genuine. Not because regulations required it. Because the lesson had reached him personally. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. "You were treated unfairly in your own neighborhood. I am sorry." The admission seemed to release a tension that had been hanging over the street for hours. Several neighbors exchanged glances. Linda Harper slowly crossed the road and approached Vanessa. "I should have spoken up sooner," she admitted quietly. "I knew the person you were. I let doubt speak louder than memory." Vanessa offered a gentle smile. "You are not the only one." More residents began approaching. Not all at once. One after another. Some offered apologies. Others simply thanked her for her years of kindness. The moment felt strangely intimate despite the cameras and attention surrounding it. Throughout it all, Vanessa never mentioned her credentials. Never mentioned the federal officials. Never mentioned the responsibilities that had impressed everyone only moments earlier. Instead, she spoke about something far simpler. "The truth matters," she said softly. "But so does patience." Sometimes people become so focused on what they think they know that they stop seeing what is right in front of them. The word settled over the crowd. Nobody argued. Nobody challenged them. Because everyone understood exactly what she meant. The federal representatives remained nearby, observing quietly. Even they seemed to recognize that this moment no longer belonged to official reports or restricted documents. It belonged to ordinary people learning an extraordinary lesson. The flashing patrol lights began disappearing as vehicles slowly departed the neighborhood. The street grew darker. Quieter. More familiar. Yet something had changed. Not in Vanessa. In everyone else. Daniel shook Vanessa's hand before returning toward his vehicle. Linda embraced her briefly. Several neighbors waved as they headed home. The night was finally ending. As Vanessa stood beneath the warm glow of her porch light watching the crowd disperse, she felt neither victory nor resentment. Only relief. Because after hours of suspicion, confusion, and misunderstanding, the truth had done what anger never could. It had opened the door to understanding. The last patrol vehicle disappeared around the corner shortly before dawn. Its fading lights left Maple Ridge Lane wrapped in the quiet stillness that had defined the neighborhood long before the confusion of the night arrived. Vanessa Carter remained on her front porch for several minutes after everyone else had gone home. The cool air carried the scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, birds were beginning to greet the coming morning. The street looked ordinary again. The sidewalks. The mailboxes. The rows of houses resting beneath a pale sky. Yet Vanessa knew something had changed. Not because of what had happened to her. Because of what people had learned about themselves. She slowly opened her front door and stepped inside. The living room looked exactly as she had left it. The unfinished cup of tea still sat on the coffee table. The novel remained open to the same page. A small lamp cast a warm glow across the room. For a moment, she simply stood there appreciating the ordinary comfort of home. Hours earlier, strangers had questioned whether she belonged there. Now the house felt more meaningful than ever. She walked to the bookshelf and picked up the framed photograph of her parents. Looking at their smiling faces, she remembered lessons they had taught her long ago. Character mattered more than reputation. Patience mattered more than pride. Truth did not always arrive quickly, but it arrived eventually. Those lessons had carried her through the longest night her neighborhood had ever seen. Outside, the first rays of sunlight began touching the rooftops. Across the street, curtains opened as residents prepared for a new day. Some would go to work. Some would take children to school. Some would probably continue talking about the events that had unfolded only hours earlier. But now those conversations would be different. The story was no longer about suspicion. It was about understanding. Later that morning, Officer Daniel Brooks drove slowly through the neighborhood during a routine patrol. As he passed Vanessa's house, he noticed her standing on the porch watering flowers beside the front steps. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Neither waved immediately. Neither spoke. Then Daniel offered a small nod of respect. Vanessa returned it with a gentle smile. The patrol car continued down the street. Nothing dramatic happened. No speeches were given. No grand gesture followed. The simplicity of the moment made it more powerful. Because respect had replaced assumption. Understanding had replaced judgment. As the sun climbed higher above Maple Ridge Lane, golden light spread across the neighborhood. Children waited for school buses. Neighbors greeted one another from driveways. Life moved forward. Vanessa set down the watering can and looked across the peaceful street. The house behind her remained unchanged. The community around her remained unchanged. Yet somehow everything felt lighter. The truth had not erased the mistakes of the night. It had done something better. It had reminded people to look beyond appearances, beyond rumors, and beyond first impressions. A soft breeze moved through the trees as morning settled fully over the neighborhood. Vanessa closed her eyes for a second and breathed deeply. Then she stepped back inside her home, leaving the door open behind her as sunlight filled the entrance. And in the quiet that followed, justice needed no announcement. It simply existed.